and I will be your host for these 2 days. Now, I know that there's been a little bit of misunderstanding, so not everybody knows what's going on in here right now, so I think they're going to be informed when there's a break. But we're trying to gather up people and to tell them that it's happening here too, with Normal. So, we have a lot of different speakers here today from all around the world who have been working on the subject that we're here to understand and to discuss, put our minds together and try to be proactive in the evolution that already has begun in many countries to decriminalize cannabis and to build a regulated system around it. As with alcohol, where it is controlled and distributed by the government, set on an age limit, and hence dosed and treated equally. But why should we treat it equally? Well, as many of you probably have seen reports about the positive effects of marijuana, healing effects and being less damaging than alcohol, how cancer patients or patients with neural damages, eating disorders use marijuana to experience recovery. But as all things, it can be abused. And by the way the system is working today, having the herb criminalized goes into a dark illegal market worth over $300 billion a year. And being a part of a drug circle that funds weapons and war and trafficking. And we don't want that. Also, it is using a lot of police resources, cutting people off from the help they need, the right to health and privacy, and also the government is losing tax money that they could have made. So, can we follow up in the footsteps of other countries such as Canada, Uruguay, and many states in America? What has happened after cannabis got legalized? So we're gonna work with some workshops tomorrow. We're gonna see some pros and cons and get a little bit wiser and then use our minds proactively in the day tomorrow. So before we begin, if you all look on the back side of your card, you can see the schedule for today and tomorrow and who's gonna be the speakers. And the first speaker up today, I'm a master's student in integrative psychotherapy. And I'm extra excited about our first speaker. He's considered one of the most experienced and respected Dutch psychiatrists in the field of drug use. So let's not wait anymore. Please welcome Frederik Polak.
There you go. Thank you. This can be closed.
You can close it, just go.
Hi. I was surprised to be invited here. I've been in Nordic countries a few times, and last time was in Copenhagen and...
Christiania.
Sorry?
Christiania.
Christiania, yes. And, well, my feeling was that things were going very slow, but now it seems that here in Norway there is a somewhat faster development in political change. I know this also because I've seen a pretty large number of cannabis users that came to Holland to get a prescription, and I was one of the medical doctors who was willing to prescribe the dosage that they wanted to take along to Norway on their way back. The point is that they could also only take along on the border to take back into their country the quantity for 1 month. So if my prescription said this person uses 1 gram of cannabis per day, then this person could only take back home 30 grams. So that led, of course, to a higher dosing for my part, and sometimes even I had real trouble of doing what this particular patient asked me to do. But there have been no problems with it. So for a while this went, and then I noticed gradually well, that's a short time ago, that less of them came and that things have really started to change here, that you could get medical or medicinal marijuana, medicinal cannabis also from Germany, from the Netherlands, and take it home without much problems anymore. At least that's my impression, is that, yeah, I see people nodding, yes. So, coming from the Netherlands, it's interesting that for a long time we were always considered to be the, yeah, how do you know it, the advanced, the phalanx, or how you must call it, where really breakthroughs were made, and that has been exaggerated, I must say, but there was some truth to it. For instance, only with the problems with heroin and cocaine that were really a big problem in Amsterdam and other cities in the Netherlands. Other countries were just as well moving in the right direction. Switzerland and well, even the Czech Republic at some point, and in Germany at least, people were always willing to discuss. That does not mean that really the things changed already. Well, on the other hand, there was enormous criticism from other countries. I don't know if you know that when first in the Netherlands the coffee shops were introduced, that was after 1976, and what changed really was a small thing in the law that it was allowed to carry 5 grams of cannabis on you, and you could buy 5 grams in a special sort of shop. And that was based on the distinction that was made then, which I don't think had been made anywhere officially, between so-called soft drugs and hard drugs. And cannabis then was the only recognized soft drug, and I think all the others were hard drugs. And when this distinction was made by a parliamentarian vote in the year 1976, that led to the start of, well, that people started small shops and selling cannabis for a reasonable price, and that then was a direct consequence of this change in the law. But it was never meant to be like this, that there was a plan to originate this idea of coffee shops, which was a code name, of course. It was a name that only had to be an insider, more or less, at the beginning, to understand what was meant by coffee shop. And so then it was really a huge change that people could buy there for 5 grams and then take it home, and there you could do with it what you wanted, of course. The biggest objection came from Sweden then, and Sweden, as a member of the European Union then, really proposed to have an economic boycott of the Netherlands because of the way we how do you call it, we endangered youth, and we also made things very dangerous for young people from Sweden. So that was a proposal that was really seriously discussed in the European Union at the time, but the other countries didn't go along, so we were saved then from this. But the debate or the criticism on the Netherlands, well, went on, and it was stronger or a bit less, and then stronger again. And at some point, the French President Chirac, he was really having his own war on this subject, a diplomatic war with the Netherlands. And that for what we found out as well, we were organizing things, and we sometimes had contact with people in the parliament or members of political parties, important members of political parties, and they all said to us, "No, this is really bad, and it's an enormous problem, the way France is trying to stop all this." But on the other hand, I remember you know about the harm reduction conferences. Those were the first international conferences that were kept, I think, every 2 years at first, and then every year in countries around the world where we could organize and meet each other regularly. And there it became clear that there was that all these European countries that were hesitant or were anti-Holland on the drug scene, that there were always also the other ideas were living there, and only they were not having much success yet, but they were there, and that protected us from well, a worse sort of interference of our policy. One story that I'd like, I come back to, I come to the actual time somewhat later in my presentation. But one thing I want to tell you, I don't know if it's known here, that somewhere in the period that it was President Clinton, that there was the Americans always have a top diplomat, top person in the drug office, and his name then is the drug czar. And the American drug czar then was a general, McCaffrey, was his name. I don't know, has anybody heard his name before? Ah, yeah. Well, and then at some point we heard that General McCaffrey wanted to make a visit to Holland to get information and to see how it went here. And well, it was seen as a good step. But then the day before he left the United States to come to the Netherlands, he gave an interview, and there he said that the Dutch drug policy was an unmitigated disaster. So, and that's a strange thing to say if you go to the country, yeah, in name, to get new information, to learn how it is there. So that led to a diplomatic row between the Netherlands and the Americans. And that was a good thing that even our, not the Prime Minister, but the Minister of Health and other important political figures let it be known to the Americans that if this was not withdrawn, what this General McCaffrey said, that we would cancel the whole visit. It was ridiculous to say it was an unmitigated disaster, and then to play as if you are on to get information from the Netherlands. Well, and that was successful, and McCaffrey came to visit, and we were afraid that coming home he would still say the same sort of things, but he really changed his tone, and that made some progress in the relationships between the Netherlands and the surrounding countries. But because our government really stood firm, that we must recognize. Well, what I'm sorry I have to tell you is that since then, not much has changed in the Netherlands. On the other parts of the whole drug problem, things have certainly changed. I don't exactly remember which year, but with the hard drug problems, we were getting along like Switzerland did, with experiments with prescription of, well, methadone was already a long time, and the Netherlands were prominent in prescribing methadone for the methadone users. And that meant also for people who were not insured, who could not pay for it, that this came from the money from the cities mostly. The cities were responsible for this. But at some point, the discussion was about user rooms. You know, this problem is a problem, a sort of place where people could sit and inject or smoke the way they wanted to do it without being harassed by the police or whatever. So really sort of safe rooms for users. And they were being created in most of the big cities, and that also was something that started in Switzerland and in Australia, you know, in small places in Australia, this harm reduction movement. So that was mostly then what people were working on, and the whole idea of saying, well, it's okay to reduce the harm, but the idea that the drugs should be forbidden is the main fault of the whole thing, and the main mistake that has been made, and that makes it impossible for us to have a normal relationship to drugs. And the normal, for many people, means then the same sort of relationship that you have to alcohol and to tobacco, and some people also to benzodiazepines or other medication they get from the doctor. And it took a long while before this came back. I was in one of the organizations that started then really to say the only solution for the whole problem can be to legalize the use and also the production and trade in these drugs. And well, we were sometimes looking for what is the best argument to use. And there were different arguments. I've heard a number of them just now here too. But one argument I have not yet heard, and I think from a point of view of human rights, the most important argument, I think, is that the state has no right to interfere when an individual is doing something that may harm him or herself. The government and laws are there to punish people who harm other people, who harm, nowadays you would also say, who harm the environment. But if you only harm yourself, then that should not be business of the government to interfere there. That is already a very old notion. It was first, as far as I know, by a political philosopher, John Mills, an English philosopher in around 1850, I think, who wrote about this as sort of a very general and important rule that to make laws against behavior or to punish people for behavior, they really must have done something else than just harming themselves. Well, but this is still not generally spread over the world. It seems normal for what we hear nowadays about the Philippines is when that started. You probably know about this. President Duterte then, who was to pose as a fighter of the drug, all the terrible things caused by drugs. And he said that his police, but also even normal citizens, if they had a suspicion of somebody using or trading in drugs, they could kill this person. Did you, who was not aware of that this has happened? I would like to know. Were you all aware of this situation in the Philippines? Yeah, okay. Because, well, it seems now that he has heard from so many countries and also important politicians that this is simply not possible, that it's legally already it's impossible to do this. There must have been at least a court case before you can execute a person if the death penalty exists in that country. You cannot do it on the basis of a suspicion. But in the meantime, many thousands of people have been killed in the Philippines in their sort of war on drugs. Well, we're looking now for a way out of this and how to see it as not a war against or whatever, but as thinking about how to regulate it. And therefore you need a political environment. You get an enormous amount of counter-arguments that may vary from more religiously based arguments that I never understand exactly where it comes from, because the Bible at least does not say that we may not use drugs. The only thing that is mentioned is wine at some point, and wine is okay. But that does not mean that the other drugs are not okay. But that's the way this has been interpreted, and may be the case also in the Nordic countries where the Protestant churches are big. And in Holland this is also maybe has been coming from the Protestant churches. The Catholic churches are somewhat more, oh yeah, here, it sounds in my ear as it is. Must I start anew? So that's religious arguments, I think you can immediately forget, but that does not mean that the other side will accept this. But there may be sensible arguments. But then the results of a number of developments are such that I think the proof is now there that the prohibition, even if you would think that that is the best thing to do, but that the prohibition does not make the situation better, but it makes it worse. And my conclusion is that, but that's not the end of my story, but to say the conclusion that I'm going to work to, that the Netherlands proved for cannabis that ending the prohibition has not led to serious problems or to a deterioration of the whole situation. And for all the other drugs, another country has delivered proof, which country is that? Portugal. Portugal, in the year 2001, decriminalized all drugs that were prohibited until that time. And that did not mean that it all was free, it was decriminalized, so the trade and the production and transport and so on remained illegal. But for the users, there was a very clear situation. For every drug, a maximum amount was determined that one could carry on one's body or that one have in one's home, and below that maximum quantity it was okay. So the only problem for the users after that important change in the law in Portugal, the only problem was where to get the drugs, because that still was illegal. Now, and there's the interesting thing, there's very little known about how the Portuguese government and the Portuguese police are handling this in practice nowadays. And that's something I went out and tried to get more information on. And then after that I will return to the Netherlands, because there are also some developments there that are interesting. And I would want everybody to get more knowledge about how this has been possible, because it's not just last year or so. This was in 2001, so really 16 years ago in Portugal. Now, how did they do this? And I must mention first that it's not that they didn't have a problem there, so that it was not a big issue. They had a really serious drug problem. It seems that they had addiction to heroin. I'm bad in remembering numbers, but it was the highest percentage of the whole of the European Union. That was of the population in Lisbon that was addicted to heroin. And there were all sorts of treatment facilities, of course, not enough to what we would say nowadays, but they were serious about it. But in that situation, in some way, some enlightened people succeeded in convincing their own parliament that it would be better to try and really decriminalize the use and possession for personal use. Now, that has happened, and since then, you never hear about Portugal anymore. You can read, you know, in Portugal, in Lisbon, is the EMCDDA, the European Monitoring Center on Drugs and Drug Addiction. The European Union's, how do you say, base for where all the information is gathered and reports are produced every year about how things are going in all these countries. But I've really tried to find out there from how this could have developed there, and you find really almost nothing about this in their written material. And for that reason also it took me a while really to get active on this. But last year I went to a conference in Lisbon on, well, mostly about their own situation. And then I must first say I had an idea how this could be explained. And I thought for that reason we have to go back to this American television series, The Wire, which probably some of you people have seen. The Wire, about the city, it was about the city of Baltimore. It was a really, really serious drug problem. And now the special thing that happened in one of the, or no, in I think the third year of The Wire was that the police chief and police of the whole city came together and had a good idea to have a new approach. And this came down to this, that the chief of police invited all people he knew in the drug trade, and he said, I want to talk about you, about how these, well, about the present situation. And these people came and they sat down, and he told them, you know, probably I have enough on each of you to put you in prison for many years, but I won't do that if we can have a different accord, how you say, a different plan. If you take care of providing people with good quality drugs, and there are no fights, and there are no killings anymore, and people are not forced to use more drugs than they want, or otherwise violence. If all that does not happen, so if I hear nothing from my cops in the street about you, then we leave you alone. You can go alone. Well, so that happened, and it went quite well. Things were much more tranquil and peaceful than ever before, until the federal government heard about it and forbade it. And then they had to go back to the old system, picking up everything, everybody who was carrying something that was suspect or something. Well, in my idea, I had seen that, and I thought that it was a very, well, probable. It was fiction. It had not happened really. It was fiction. But I thought that's not a bad idea. And maybe this is what the Portuguese have done. And then I went to this conference in Lisbon and tried to get in contact, because I knew that if I sent a letter and asked about somebody, is it true, that would never work. I had to get in contact with somebody at the end of the afternoon when we were drinking, and it was a good atmosphere, and I could talk to somebody from the Ministry of Health or from the Ministry of Justice to hear about this. And just one person really got into this kind of conversation. A high functionary at the Ministry of Justice, a woman who was there, well, already for many years. She knew it all exactly. And I asked her this, and I told her the same I just said. And she said, well, maybe, yes, maybe, I don't know. That was all. So I think that there is something interesting going on there. The whole philosophy behind what they do. They keep secret, and they are able to show to the world and to the European Union, and it is a fact that all their data on use, on problematic use, and on drug deaths, and on the number of people that have to be hospitalized, and knew how many young people, they all are. It's not that they all went back down to zero, but they are a little bit lower than they were before, and a little bit lower mostly than countries nearby like Spain, France, Italy, but also in the whole European Union. So that means that the ending of the prohibition had not caused a terrible, dangerous situation. So it had led to a situation that was no more than a little bit better than it would have been otherwise. But still, I think it is very important to keep this in mind, because the idea that it's only okay if it's a lot better, or if there is a huge difference with the way it was under prohibition, that is making a fool of yourself. There is no need for that. The idea that we could ever create a society without drug use is a really ridiculous and stupid idea. So I think that when you succeed in reducing problems, the real problems that there are surrounding drugs and drug use, that if you can reduce them a little bit, and then, must be said also, with fewer people in prison, that is, of course, I should have mentioned that, that's, of course, the first big consequence of the Portuguese system, that many people would have been in prison by now if they hadn't changed this system, and they would have long prison sentences. And this is the same that happened in the Netherlands, but then only for cannabis, because we went no further than the decriminalization of cannabis, not legalization, and because, like with the other drugs in Portugal, the production, and the trade, and the transport is still illegal. And the problem in Holland now, and now I get to the point about my country, where I'm really a little ashamed of it, is that the police and the Justice Department are really having, well, they don't use the word war, but it is really a war on small and larger producers of cannabis. And everything, they have with helicopters and airplanes, they fly over areas, and if a roof somewhere, they can see that it is warmer than the surrounding roofs with infrared rays. And if such an attic in a house is warmer than the other houses, they send the police there, and often that's a place where cannabis is being grown. And they do this on a grand scale now, and that is really what I think is the terrible situation that we are in now with the last few governments. Even when the use, for the users, it has become clear that they are free to buy as much cannabis as they want, all the different varieties, and they can take it home, and there is only a limit in Holland as to how much you can carry on you. That's 5 grams. But at home, I don't think there is a limit like this. So, in fact, everybody's free to buy and use cannabis as much as he or she wants. And the levels of use are fairly steady and a little bit lower in Germany, Belgium, France, especially France, has very strict prohibition and has higher numbers of users and problem users than we have. So that is in itself an interesting thing, I think, to spread this. I think that there is too little knowledge about what happened in Portugal, and the point is also that they themselves don't seem this to be known too much outside. They wait, I think, until there's more time or the difference. They don't follow this argument as I framed it just now, to say, well, simply the fact that the problems are a little bit lower than they were, a little bit smaller, that's very positive. It's very stupid to think it's only positive when there is no more drug trade. So that is nonsensical to have that as a criterion. Criterion should be, is it a bit lower, much lower, okay, a little bit lower is already very good when you save so many people from trouble and from having to go to prison for this. Well, that's an important thing that I wanted to convey to you. Now, as to the present situation in the Netherlands, there is one small positive development, and that is that one of the political parties in the, just left of the middle has proposed to arrange it all in a different way, and there is now, it's not accepted by the government, but it is so that they have, they've said that municipalities may draw up a plan to grow cannabis for their own city, and then some way to sell that to the customers. But it is very vaguely worded, the formulations are quite vague, and also it's not, they don't keep in mind that this is really threatening for the people who are working in the cannabis trade right now. Because does it mean that the coffee shops, where everybody knows you can buy cannabis and which really have a function as a sort of social function in the Netherlands. Those of you who have been there probably know this in the cities there are already not just one coffee shop, but there are a number of them, and it has a very large social role in the city. Many people come in there also and need to drink coffee or fresh or to eat something or to chat. It's just a sort of a cafe, but then a cafe not based on alcohol, but on cannabis use. And this proposal of this opening the Dutch government made now for 6, I don't remember whether it is 6 or 8 municipalities should come up now with a proposal how to arrange legal growth of cannabis for their city, for their municipality. That it's so unclear that there is hesitation among the cities even to to volunteer and to come up with a plan, because it's too unclear, all of this. And I think this is a new example of how afraid the Dutch politicians are after what happened, what I told you about, that Sweden even wanted a complete economic boycott of Holland. If we make serious steps on the other drugs, who knows what the consequences will be. And that may also be a reason for Portugal not to be too open about how this really works. And, you may quote me on this, what I told you about this. I'm certain that this is the way it works. But maybe if you put this in a newspaper and write about it, the Portuguese ambassador will react with a letter to the editor and deny it all. That is very well possible. They don't want this yet to be debated in the international fora. That is my conclusion from this. And so the idea that Holland is the most progressive country on this is, I'm sorry to say, is a long time past, and I vote for Portugal here. Well, I think this is what I had in mind. I had some notes and I left them and I forgot them in the airplane. So, but if you have questions.
Can I have one short question? I hear your point about Portugal and the Netherlands. I was just wondering if you see any differences in the use of heavy drugs or hard drugs compared to Portugal in comparison to the Netherlands. Do you think that cannabis can be used as a substitute or a treatment alternative for people who are opiate addicts or benzodiazepine addicts or having trouble with alcohol? Do you think that it's a better solution to regulate cannabis or like we do in the Netherlands? Or do you feel that Portugal has the best solution for that?
Well, at the last point you say, I think that Portugal, it is my interpretation of what I see happen here and read about it. Because you have to explain why Portugal is not writing about this more openly in their reports, their yearly reports for the EMCDDA. You don't find this in there. Only the statistics are positive in this slightly positive way. So not many people understand that this is really very positive. It is not just a little bit better, because it means they stopped the war on drugs and the results are a little bit better. More than that, we won't ever get, I think. But that was your first question.
And a short follow-up is, do you think cannabis is a viable alternative for other addictions?
I
For
don't,
example,
well,
music or...
in small percentage of cases, I think it is. I have not heard about it, or I have not read any trial on this with people who wanted to try this. It seems to me that it's the other way around a bit for hard drug users and really experienced year-long hard drug users. For them, cannabis, they say it's not a drug, that's this. They even think it's ridiculous to they smoke it, but more like somebody else smokes tobacco. But I don't know whether they feel much from their smoking. No, so I don't think that maybe for people who hesitate and used heroin once or twice and are hesitating to go on, you would better say, why don't you fix yourself on cannabis? That would be better. Then maybe.
I'm puzzled as to your assessment of the Portugal experiment. You seem to be saying they are not prone to advertise or report on their results. Just recently I've read 3 major reports. I guess they are trustworthy to some extent, but all of them, without any question, by every measure conceivable, ascertain that it is positive in all kinds of ways. And in fact, they go even further in making the case.
How the police goes after the big traders?
How do they do that?
Can you find that, or that they leave them alone?
Well, they more or less leave them alone. In other words, decriminalization did not lead to legalization, but they seem to be making greater room, leaving a greater margin. In other words, it's a bit hypocritical. Sometimes we want to prefer one policy as opposed to another, decriminalize, not legalize, fully, in all respects, as a matter of fact. But off and on, if you take that policy of decriminalization seriously to its extreme consequences, you end up having to open your mind to the realization it's better to legalize because you have greater control and you prevent entry gate drugs from entering the market for people who are not accustomed to it. So the Rand Corporation has a report on the Portugal experiment that is amazing. Greenblatt.
I know.
Greenblatt.
They never describe how the. There is always this distinction: the demand side and the supply side.
Yeah.
In Portugal, the demand side is completely decriminalized.
Yeah.
The supply side still is completely illegal.
Right.
Well, and the point that I raised is, how is the government there handling the supply side? You don't read that.
Don't hear much about it. And that's what I mean, the hypocrisy.
Did you read any of
Yes, the hypocrisy is that they're leaving them a greater margin. In other words, they think, in order to have better control of the quality, they have to actually let it happen, or even have an eye onto it, oversee it. How do you avoid it otherwise?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting. So then the police becomes more like
Quality control.
an inspection.
Yes, quality control.
Well, but there you have it. So they are not having a war on drugs anymore.
No, they're not. But again, for the propaganda.
They don't. If you legalize, then you must make up a whole set of laws and just arrange who can do this and who can do that and what are all the consequences of that.
And they're not facing up to that.
No, but I think it's very sensible. They let a gradual change come around,
Yes.
but they still are in a position to do.
To crack down.
If something goes wrong,
Yes.
immediately they can do what they want.
Yes.
And that is, if you do that from the right perspective, it seems to me that is a very good way of letting things develop.
Right. And they've had 16 years. I mean, 16 years is a long period for an experiment of this kind.
Sure.
I mean, next door they were so surprised that why we're continuing the war on drugs, given the fact that all the results are the opposite of what we claimed we wanted to achieve. But here's my question to this. How long have we known that the war on drugs was a failure? How long has it been? And how long do we need to wait to figure out that it is generating the opposite results of what we desire? I cannot comprehend this. I don't know where it comes from. Who are the sensible people that we elect to position of power to continue perpetuating something of this kind when we've known for decades already that the war is working?
Dear gentlemen, I do feel your passion, but we're on a schedule, so we have to wrap it up. You can reply, but then we can't move like 15